Okay, we're back. It's COMP2068, Advanced Web Programming, and we are week 9, lesson 9, part 1. And as you can hear from my voice, I'm just a little bit under the weather, but I'm going to continue doing stuff. We're going to be talking about the final project for a second, and then we'll have a small recording around that, and then we'll stop. We'll talk about the rest of the stuff. So let's take a look. So from where we stand right now, I've already given you your assignment 3 last week, week 8. Week 9, we'll give you plenty of time. This is actually wrong. It should be here for your presentation. Week 9 is where we're actually giving your. I'm kind of giving you your final project week 9. It's going to be due week 14. So in this week here, and this is where you're going to do your presentation. Your final presentation is going to happen on week 14. So if you look at Blackboard, I'm just going to change this up on my folder structure. I use my folders actually as some organization. We're going to talk about different things. Next week, by the way, I'm going to stop talking about MailPilot by next week at some point. This week I'm going to be talking about the second stage of the build. We made MailPilot work, right? But it has no collisions now, for now. So I'm going to teach you how to do collisions. Talk about collisions, talk about best practices around collisions today and all that stuff. But I also want to talk about this final project because if I leave it too long, you may not decide who you're going to work with, and then you'll bury yourself, as an example, by starting too late. Please, I'm asking you in advance, do not start late on this one. You'll not be able to finish it. You won't do it any justice, and you won't get top marks. It's also worth 30% of your final grade, which is crazy. So this is going to be replacing your exam, these two things. So there won't be an exam in this course, right, on the plus side. But on the minus side, the final project was 30, and then you've got your presentation, which is worth 10. So that's 40% of your final grade, right, in like 2 little pieces. It's a big part. Well, it's like an exam, right? You have a presentation too.
For the game?
Yes. So the way it goes like this is you're going to make an arcade game, and it says either alone or as a team of 2. You will create an original 2D arcade game. Now, let's go back and talk about original. Is it truly original? No. You can definitely base it off something else. Like let's say, for example, you're making your side scroller right now, and you're using this as almost like your platform to create your final, right? You can certainly do this, and for your side scroller, I'm only requiring you to put in 1 level. Right, so really your finite state machine, which we're going to talk about, only really has like your start screen with an instruction, your game screen, and then finally your game over screen. That's what you're doing for your side scroller, right? And it's going to the side, right? Very, very simple. Your final though, you don't have to make it a side scroller. You can do whatever you want, right? Within reason. I'd like you to check with me when it comes to your ideas, if you're going to veer off away from doing a side scroller and do something unique. And people do unique stuff every semester. There's always new things that they come up with. Whether you want to do a tile map, some kind of tile-based game, whether you want to do, some kind of top-down game and so on. And I kind of mentioned them here. I say you can make a scrolling game, a platform game, where you make some kind of jumping, running, shooting kind of game. Tower defense, more difficult if you're a tower defense kind of guy. Because sometimes you require shortest path calculations and so on for tower defense sometimes. So I recommend if you're going to do tower defense, do it with somebody because there's a lot of programming involved in logic, making it work. A 3/4 down adventure you can do, so you're going to need, again, the whole tiling idea, right? Where you use a tile map and to create your 3/4 down adventure, almost like a little RPG. And when I say little, I mean truly little, right? Because if you make it too big, you ain't going to finish it. It's not going to happen, right? And some other classic arcade game, like let's say if you wanted to make Space Invaders, right? That would be, I'm just saying, I would accept it. But the challenge would be that for you to make a good Space Invaders game, you have to make it your own. So it can't look exactly like Space Invaders and all that kind of stuff. And the trick is it has to have a start screen, the main game screen, a game end screen, a scoring system, some kind of instruction screen, and 3 levels of difficulty: easy, medium, hard, or level 1, level 2, level 3. However you do it. Now, it may sound like it's easy, but guys, the devil is in the details in this one, right? So please be careful. Don't think it's easy. You underestimate this thing. This is a project. Again, think about what we're doing here. Even though we're calling this advanced web programming, it's like you're making your own app with lots of little complexities, right? Lots of little piece parts to it. And there could be some moving parts here to make this thing work. So especially when you're working with a partner, it can be quite complex to work with a partner as well, right? So don't start this late. As soon as you're done your side scroller, work on this one, okay? That's why I'm giving it to you early. You must use your own graphic and sound assets. So if you're basing it off the side scroller, this is already done, right? You already got your own graphics and sounds. That's not a big issue. You may choose a web API of your choice. So you don't have to use Create.js. If you wanted to use Phaser for your final game or something else, and you want to learn something new, go ahead. I highly recommend you don't, though, because you don't have time, right? Some people, though, are very, they want to push the envelope. They want to push themselves to do different things. And so they choose to try different things out, which I fully encourage. But, the disadvantage is that, you have a limited time to do all this kind of stuff. Okay. Important. There's a note here, right? Please keep in mind that the final presentation, which will be used in place of a final exam, is worth 10% of your final project or your final mark. So how will this work? So time frame wise, week 14 comes up. This thing is due. This thing is due on a Friday, right? But guess what? Your presentations are due on the Thursday, right? Which means you really have to have your final project pretty much done. And it's a good thing. So if we have any tweaking to do, if we give you some feedback in class, like you guys come up, you show me your final presentation or your presentation for your project, it's got to be like in 10 minutes. You show me your game, give me a bit about your journey, and I'll give you more details as we get closer and all that kind of stuff, right? It's got to be pretty much done. Now, if we give you feedback, we say, you know what, I think you need to change this because this isn't working, or you have a glitch to fix. You have a day to fix it, to kind of actually put in a different, one more thing to fix with. From a deployment perspective, this thing's got to be live, and we're going to talk about some deployment options that I'm going to give you, right? One of the options is, of course, using the school server. If you want to, and I put it in here that there's some options for bonus marks. I'm also going to give you an option to get bonus marks if you deploy it on a node server. Okay, and we'll talk about how to do that a little bit. I'll discuss it over the next couple weeks. And you can open up your own account with Heroku, right, which I highly recommend you do. It's a free account. And as an example, just to show you what I've done to deploy my game on Heroku, if I do something like starbase12.heroku.com, try it out, then I've deployed my Starbase 12 game on Heroku, right? Now Heroku is a node server, so you have to convert your game into a node, kind of a node application, and it takes a little bit of effort. Now, if you notice, I'm still getting some pretty good frame rate, 60 frames per second on Heroku, and again, I got all my piece parts to it, right? Right, so I got my instruction screen for the final, like I said, a bunch of different sub menu, right, back, and then I can play the game. That's just my voice modulated, right? And then, of course, I can do my firing with my my particle effects. We talked about this before. So again, the way I did my levels in this game was I did an incremental difficulty, slowly adding more. I have not just 3 levels, I have many levels, right? But I did it in a way that I don't need to add additional states. I have one game state, and what I'm doing is I'm adding every time I kill my enemies, I add additional more enemies, basically. There's a little bit of trickiness around that because you got to figure out this is the same state that you're doing, but you're resetting everything and adding more difficulty, and you're counting, how many turns you've taken, kind of thing. So there's different approaches to the 3 game levels, right? So there's definitely some flexibility in your creativity, which I want to give you. I don't want to put you in a box, but at the same time, I don't want to toss you off a cliff with the difficulty level, right? Because you could, if I give you whatever you want to do, you could write yourself into a corner, and there's no way you're finishing. Because you start off a project that's too big, and then it's even with a partner, you may not finish, and then that kind of defeats the purpose of this thing. So you want to keep it small. We want to come out of this course with one little game that you made that's your own. That's my goal, right? And it's doable, guys. If you really focus from now until the end, You can kind of come up with something that's a little showpiece that you can put on, one of your, on your resume or something that you made. It's web-based, it's available, it's cross-platform, so it works in all systems, and it can even be mobile if you want to, if you work on it. We'll talk about that. Okay, so again, final presentation is due on the Thursday. Your final project is due on the Friday at midnight. So it gives you quite kind of a day and a bit to finish it all off. In terms of mark breakdown, it's kind of the same thing. Your start screen, your gameplay screen, your game end screen. Then you have your 3 levels, and if you notice, the player control of an avatar, similar to what we said in Side Scroller, the player's avatar may have weapons or other devices that he can use to defeat the computer-controlled enemies. A computer control of AI or enemies, the enemies should be abundant enough to challenge the player but not be impossible to beat. Again, somewhat similar to what we put in the Side Scroller. In fact, it's almost identical, but here's where it changes. So 3 levels of difficulty. Again, 2 ways of doing it: easy, medium, hard. Increasing levels of challenge, right? Like a level 1, level 2, level 3. And what does it say here? Do not simply make the game faster. Please don't do that. That's not increasing levels of difficulty. That's stupidity, right? Making a game faster and faster and faster makes it unplayable, right? And don't ever increase your frame rate. Don't go from 60 to 90 frames, because that's just a smart thing to do. That's dumb, right? And it also makes it so that your device isn't, compatible with all kinds of, your game's not compatible with all devices, because some devices can't really support more than 40 or 50 frames per second, right? So, like I said, don't change those things. That's cheating. In my books, the better way to do it instead of changing the frame rate is actually add more enemies. Make your ship or your player move slower, right? Like have lag, right? So when you press the button, he doesn't move. He doesn't shoot over to the other side of the screen. Limit his movement, right? So it's not like he can go anywhere he wants, right? That's bad, right? So you want to make sure you have you're creating your own game rules. There's certain things that players can do, and there's certain things the player cannot do. And then give him some kind of power-ups maybe that can give him more things temporarily. So here's one: random opportunities to generate points to the player aside from killing the enemies. So yeah, kill the enemies, get points, but you also should get some kind of points from doing something else, right? Like maybe defending the starbase. Every time you live a level, you get some points, kind of thing, in my particular case. Some kind of scoring system, right? And a life counter or health status that decreases each time his avatar, your avatar is killed. Some kind of, I'm dead, or I get shot and I have almost like a health bar, and you can define different ways of doing things like that. Add sound effects for collisions with enemies, collecting points, shooting attacks, explosions, and whatever. There has to be sound effects. Your game can't be a silent game. All right, that would be bad. And a game soundtrack. Okay, I want a game soundtrack. It's not an option here. I want to hear it, right? Internal documentation we talked about before, very similar to last time. External documentation, a little bit more detail here with an interface sketch and screen descriptions as different items. And describe your levels, describe your characters, and so on. And then when we get down to the bottom, by the way, if you notice, there's no, I don't make you do GitHub. Okay, but, however, if you're working with a partner, it's going to be required, right? And what I mean by that is I want to see both of you guys, right? And I'll put this up on Blackboard so you see it, even though it's not here in part of my document. I want to see, if you're working with a partner, both partners contributing equally approximately to GitHub. And that's where I want you to collaborate. Now, it doesn't have to be GitHub. If you want to use Bitbucket, you can use Bitbucket. GitHub, if you want to use Dropbox, right, for this final, it's okay. As long as I see evidence that both people are working equally, I'm good to go. Like, I'm okay with it. So here's some options. Include a final boss monster to defeat. So you do level 1, level 2, you get to level 3, and the boss comes out and tries to eat you, whatever. Add power-ups, like that gives a guy extra speed, shield, something. Maybe some kind of inventory that the player has, as opposed to just, he can fire, shoot, and move, kind of thing. That's not cool. Add some cheat codes, right? So, you put in God mode, and then now he's indestructible for 10 seconds, whatever it is, right? Create a mini game in a section of the main arcade game. This is hard. I would award more points for this in terms of bonus. But this is like me going like, I'm playing an RPG, and in order for me to open, maybe if you ever played any of these games, you have to pick a lock, you know, kind of thing, or something like that, or disarm a bomb, you know, in order for that's part of the game, or you know, whatever it's going to be, hack a computer. You know, you ever play these kind of games where you have these options? It's like a mini game, and it's like you have a certain amount of time to do something, and it could be just like drawing a line from one side of the board to the other through a path, you know, without touching the other side or something. I mean, there's many ways to create that little mini game. I'll give you more points for that, but I'll tell you it's hard to do, right? It's not easy for you to create a mini game within a game because now you have extra states. You have to move from a game state to the mini game state and back to the game state again and save everything. All the objects, the locations and everything. It's not easy. Empower the player to gain an NPC, some kind of helper, right? And the last one is make it possible for the player to save or load his game, which we haven't talked about. There's other ones too. If you can think of other things like saving your high score, right? Like, you know, somewhere. If you're using a Node server, then you'd obviously want to save it as a flat file or in a database. Typically when we work with Node, we work with something like a NoSQL database, Firebase, MongoDB, something like that. So certainly you can do that, and if you do deploy on a Node, it doesn't say it here, for deployment options, I'll give you a bonus, like I said. Another bonus would be if you deploy on Heroku, right? So again, when you do these things, we do extra stuff, you need to mention it in your external documentation so I can look through it and say, hey, these are all the extra options. I don't want to go searching or try and figure out what the extras are in your game. I may miss something. Then you're not going to get the points for it, and that's not cool. Again,
the player has an inventory, right? Is that a part of the assignment?
It's not part of it. It's a bonus. Right? It's all bonus. These are all bonus options, right? And again, I broke it down here. And it says, hey, a zip archive of your project files or a link to your project on GitHub preferred. But remember, I'm not giving you points for GitHub if you're alone. I will give it to you, though. I need to see it. It's required. And I'll put that, again, I'll put that up on Blackboard. If you're working with somebody else, I want to see the collaboration between you guys. Okay? So you have to make a collaborator. One of you has to be the owner, the other person's the collaborator, and then see commits on both sides, right? There's got to be a reason why you're working with somebody else. If you're working with somebody else, you know, they've got to contribute in some way. They can't just ride on your coattails, right? And vice versa. You can't just ride on somebody else's coattails. They do all the work, and then you do nothing. I've had some really good collaborations in the past, though, and I have to tell you that I'm going to try and keep this positive. And I won't talk about the dogs that I've seen as well. I've seen some dogs in my time, right? But the positive collaborations I've seen is where an artist, you have an artist friend, right? And you're in the class together, and you know one person's an artist, the other person's a programmer, and they come together to make this awesome game, a unique game. I've seen that as well. And the other option is, what if you know somebody on the art side? You know, we're on the in SDVA as an example, and they're an artist, and you want to use their stuff, and it's not your stuff, it's their stuff. Yeah, sure you can. I can't collaborate with them. I can't give you marks to work with somebody else, but if they want to definitely help you on your project from an art perspective, yeah, it's cool. It's your work, right? And it's a good opportunity for you to bond with somebody else. So I think this is where I want you guys to go. But again, this is at minimum, you got to figure, if I was going to size this thing that I'm talking about here, and if I started from scratch, so I didn't start at the side scroller level. You're making your own constructs, you're making your own objects, all that stuff. Because maybe, and by the way, if you work with somebody else, some of the stuff you did on your side scroller is going to have to be redone, right? Because you're working with somebody else now, it's something new, right?
Does it have to be a collaboration between both of our projects, or can it be one project that we pick?
You can make one project and pick it, but what I'm saying is even there, it's still got to meet the requirements, right? So sometimes if you start from scratch, I'm just going to go with a scratch option. So I start from scratch. I don't use my side scroller assignment 3 as a kickoff point, if you will, right? Okay, this project is a 4-week project starting from scratch. Okay, I'll tell you right now, in terms of time frame. It's not just developing, it's also testing, right? It's also doing external documentation, internal documentation, going up on GitHub, deploying to Heroku, hopefully for extra points, creating your presentation, or screencast, which I will also accept, right? If you want to do a screencast, you're not able to be here on the final days, and so on. I can accept that, but you have to do the same thing. You have to balance between, both people have to present, right? So it's a 4-week project. If you start from the time when you're doing your side scroller, you can probably get away with doing it within 3 weeks, right? You're only going to save about a week. It won't be a lot because there's still a meld. When you work with somebody else, you work a little slower typically when you work when you're on your own, because both of you have to get together, either whether it's virtually or physically, right? You have to agree on what you're kind of building, right? And then there's got to be a collaboration. If one person's doing all the work and the other person's doing nothing, I'm going to give the other person who doesn't do any work 0. It's telling you this in advance. If I see 0 updates on GitHub, that's going to be my proof that you guys are working together, right? If I see one person giving nothing to GitHub and the other person giving everything to GitHub, the person gives nothing gets 0 for the final. That means they lose 30% of their project. They might get some points for presentation value at the end, but they've lost 30%. That's crazy. I don't recommend that. Please don't do that. Work with someone that you know you can work with. Start early, right? Ask questions. Check with me to see if you're on the right path, because you don't want to just write yourself into a corner. These kind of things are important, right? So, and I think, from a time frame perspective, we got to talk about time frames now, just a little bit of a preview. We're sitting right now at week 9, which is right here, right? We have week 10, week 11, week 12, week 13. So a few weeks left. Week 12 and week 13, I'm not going to do teaching weeks here. These are just workshop weeks, right? Here's what happens in week 12 and week 13, right? No one shows up to class, right? Traditionally, I'm just telling you. Because I'm saying, hey guys, it's a workshop. You bring your code in, and I can work with you and help you fix some problems. Show me what you're doing so I can redirect you so you can get maximum marks. You know what happens? No one shows up because you know what? They had other crap going on. They got other courses, they got other assignments, they got other stuff, and they don't show up. They don't take advantage of this time. And there's 6 hours. I'm gifting you 6 hours of time. I'm saying let's work together for 6 hours. Here's the lab time that you can work on your project in class for 6 hours, right? And to me, I think it's a great way of getting prepared for what needs to happen. So, I'm just telling you, this is the plan. So that's week 12 and 13. So that means I have week 10 and 11 to give you new stuff. But what am I going to give you in week 10 and 11? Next week, I'm probably going to talk about box 2D, some kind of physics, right? We're going to talk about that. And then probably the week after, I got to talk about particle effects, right? So between the two things, I might be able to add a little bit of more content and give you something like tile maps and how to incorporate tile maps into your game, okay? And I'm also going to talk about some other game engines out there that might help you build your game. In fact, let's do that a little bit now. There is something that we can work with Create.js, and again, there's several projects that are out there that are kind of like these indie projects. And if I go to creatine, let's go to creatine. It's not creatine that you use in the gym, by the way, right? It's creatine from Create.js, right? Well, what this gentleman has done, right, is it's an indie developer, and he's provided additional functionality for Create.js. Okay, so let's see what actually he does. So he does things like this. He can do transition effects between scenes. He actually has a scene library. So he has a scene manager. Instead of you building your own finite state machine, he's built it. He's called it a director, and he's kind of matched it up with what he's seen in other game systems, obviously, where you can do a fade in, kind of thing where you fade in to your scene and fade out and all that kind of stuff. He's got code examples here on how to do that, right? So it's not like you're going to work from scratch. You could. There's some layout helpers, like for example, different box sizes and grid border sizes and all this other stuff. And he also does things like, for example, on tile maps. He tells you how to load tile maps, how to use tile maps. Here's an example of a perspective tile map that you can build, right? And again, I mean, you can certainly, I'm guessing you probably scroll, right? So this should be your tile map, right? So it looks like, like a tile map. And if you notice, he's still running at 50 and 60 frames per second, which isn't bad. So again, Creatine has additional functionality that works nicely. It's hosted on GitHub, and it works nicely with Create.js. However, one of the challenges are if you're going to use TypeScript, you may need to create your own type definition library for Creatine, which is okay. It's not that big of a deal. We'll talk about how to do that. And all it's going to give you is code hinting again. That's what it's all around. So again, this is just one library. There's others out there that they've come up with that provide you with additional functionality. He's got a section on Learn. He's got a very nice API documentation. He's kind of mirrored it after the Create.js API. So and again, this is just one dude that does this, right? So he's kind of put together this whole thing, how to do this, a progress bar. He's kind of got examples for a TMX layer, TMX loaders for your TMXs are tile maps, right? That's what they are. And you can, of course, use a tile map loader like tiled. So if I go to tiled, right, and there's a map editor. We kind of showed you this before, I think. But tiled actually allows you can download, it's a free download, allows you to create and manage your tile maps for your games. Right now, again, it's available for, it works on any game system. It's platform independent. So if you want to do kind of a tiled type game, then you'd have to use tiled as well as something like a tile map loader. You can make your own. It's a very simple one. You can look online for others. There's all kinds of others out there as well. But this is the stuff that I want you to look at in terms of, are there other helper libraries out there to help me with my game? This isn't cheating. This is using somebody else's API, right? A plugin, if you will, for Create.js. Right? So I would accept something like this. In other words, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to, right? You only have a few weeks in order for you to get what you want. So that's one. And also, let's mention a couple of other resources for your final. For example, we talked about sound effects, right? I give you a bunch of links. Like, for example, this sound effect link, where you can make your own custom sound effects. Like, for example, I want to do a power-up, or an explosion, or a laser shot, right? You can make your own, and I recommend you do these kind of things because this is, again, it's not proprietary. It's your own. You can kind of fool with this little tool. And again, I put them all on my Blackboard. I think we talked about this already in terms of tools, in terms of how to make this. It's an online site that you can use, right? So that's one thing. And we're also, if you want to learn other stuff, like for example, I have, we're going to talk particle editors, and there's one that comes from Purple Monkey Studios, which we're going to be using, if it's still up. Here it is. And again, these are just little particles that you can make, and it's all JavaScript code, right? So there it is. And I've actually written a type definition library for you that I'm going to give you, so it'll work nicely with TypeScript, right? So again, if you want to make a particle explosion like I made for my game, or if you want to use particles for different effects, rain, smoke, whatever you want to do, you can do it. And there's some really good examples on other sites. And again, there's different particle sites that you can use. Let's take a look at an online particle editor for Starling. It's still, the idea is the same, right? So here's fire. It's just a bunch of particles. And you can kind of emulate. Some of these same controls are available on the JavaScript side. So you can make it here, you get these controls, and you set your options on the JavaScript side. We'll talk about that as we come closer. There's also something called Box2D Web, right, which we're going to talk about probably next week, Box2D Web. And Box2D Web is the physics solution, physics engine. If you notice, it's actually physics. If you want to make a game, it's all on independence with using JavaScript, right? Hey, traditionally, FYI, Box2D, very little documentation. It's a pain in the ass. You're going to hit your head against the wall, but I'm going to talk about it. We'll talk about good things and bad things about Box2D, and if you want to use it or not. It will not be required, right? But I will talk about different technologies here to make your game go. So, some good things coming up. And of course, I talked about another API called Phaser. I don't think it's a bad thing to try out. It's a really cool little framework, and the great thing is it does work with desktop and mobile, and has TMX loading and all that stuff built in. It has a preloader, it has WebGL, it has all this other stuff. I'll tell you right now that Phaser is a little bit more advanced in terms of functionality, but also the learning curve is a little steeper. So be warned, if you wanted to start over and do something with Phaser, there's some really cool examples out there, but you can, again, there's a little bit of a learning you have to do, right? So it means you have to relearn, you have to spend, so allocate time learning a whole new thing, because that's part of your project. There might be a learnings, right? And then implement this for this new game framework for your next game, right? So again, they've got lots of documentation. The great thing about Phaser is their API documentation is amazing, right? And it's very well supported. They also support TypeScript, so you can make Phaser games with TypeScript and so on. And they've got some really good examples of games that were created with Phaser that you can take a look at, right? Just like they do for Create.js. All right, so I don't think it's wrong to take a look at this and try different things out. I'm not going to limit you to one API. I want this to be a good learning experience for all of you. This is what this thing is all about. And again, even though we're doing advanced web development, I want to restate that it's not about making games. We're making games because for us to create, if I was to make you make a calculator app or some kind of business app right now, right, you can outthink the app. I can tell you what to do, and in like maybe a week, you'll finish it, right? Even if I had a database component. Making a game, there's different moving parts. It's more difficult to do, actually. It's the most difficult project I can give you, more than anything else. So, unless I force you to do certain things. What? Well, no, but then after you know how to do these things, you can adopt and use any, you should be able to adopt and use any JavaScript API, right? And that's the idea here. I want you to take an API, learn it really well, whether it's Create.js, Phaser coming in the coming weeks, or so on. And that way, when you take it back, when you leave this course, you have this really cool basis for understanding how to apply an API in JavaScript, the JavaScript framework. And it doesn't matter, you can apply the same principles to things like AngularJS, which is very popular nowadays, and the whole mean stack idea. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about that here in this course, because traditionally what we want to talk about in a course like this is something like, you might hear things like, hey, we're going to learn PHP. I thought we were going to learn PHP in this course, Tom. No, PHP is on the downflow, right? Node.js is on the upswing, right? So if I was going to recommend something to learn, it's Node, it's Express, it's MongoDB, and it's Angular. So the whole mean stack, MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node. That's something that you want to go towards learning, as opposed to the old PHP MySQL technology, the AMP stack, Apache MySQL PHP. It's cool, and there's a lot of it out there, but you're going to get it from other professors, not me. Like, you should have already got PHP from somebody else at this stage, right? So for me to rehash PHP again, or to go into ASP.NET that you might have already done with Rich, I don't see why I would do that. I want to kind of stick with JavaScript, and I think JavaScript is the future. TypeScript is at 1.4 from a technology perspective. And just to tell you what's my strategy with TypeScript for a second, let's go to typescriptlang.org. This is where you learn how to do all the TypeScript stuff you need, that we talked about before, but there's actually another site as well. If you go to github.com and you go to Microsoft, Microsoft has a bunch of their own GitHub open source project here, and one of them, of course, is TypeScript. The great thing with TypeScript, it also talks about different things in terms of the language, how to build TypeScript from scratch. In terms of the language specification, it talks about the language specification here, right? Here's the specs on it. Very detailed about TypeScript. And it also talks about the future of TypeScript here on this particular page, like where you're going with it, all that kind of stuff. Like, they actually talk here, where are they at right now? If you wanted to download and install this latest version of TypeScript, this is version 1.4, and I think it's 1.4x, which means you're almost at 1.5. I think it's a 1.5 beta that's up right now, which is kind of cool. And again, 1.4 includes things like using unions when it comes to declaring variables. So remember, we can declare variables as a string and an integer. That's a new thing in Harmony, right? ECMAScript Harmony, which is coming out. So new technologies that are out there. So when you come away from this course, you're going to have a way of writing JavaScript more effectively from an application level perspective. We're going to be writing an MVC of types because you're making a finite state machine. You have views, you have a controller. The only thing you're missing is the model, and that's where you would be putting things in terms of your data. If you're going to save things to your high score, as an example, you'd use some kind of model, right? But that's the only thing that you'd be missing from this course. Also, Twitter they have a really cool Twitter page from TypeScript. So if you go to typescriptlang.org and you want to interact, they have all kinds of ways of interacting with TypeScript guys. And for example, they have TypeScript 1.4 you can download from here. They also have a Visual Studio version, 2015, which is it's kind of a community version 5. You can download here that includes TypeScript 1.4 if you want to go there. I don't recommend it if you're not in a development environment, but it's not bad. And they also give you command line stuff to use in order for you to use TypeScript, right? So you don't have to use Visual Studio. Okay, one more thing I'll talk about, and then we'll end this one, and we'll go actually into programming. So let's say you hate Visual Studio, or you know what, you want to move away from it because you want to deploy to Heroku, right? And you want to use your command line tools. How do we do that? And Brown Sugar over here, he said, I have no idea how to connect my GitHub and stuff like that to my project. How do I do that? Right? Let me go to the Windows side for you. And remember when you downloaded GitHub, you got this thing called Git Shell. Yeah? Let's launch Git Shell. Well, shall we? Why don't you join me on Git Shell for a second? Right. Now you should have it in your system. If you've downloaded and installed your little app for GitHub, then you'll get Git Shell. For the guys who are using the school systems, you can certainly download and install the version of this little app that comes, this GitHub app, right? So when you download and install Git Shell, there's a couple things you can do here that you can't do on a regular Windows prompt. You can't do this example on a Windows prompt, ls, right? That's a Linux command, right? But the other thing that's really cool with Git Shell, right? I'm going to go back. I'm going to navigate here. I want you to navigate to your desktop, please, guys. So I'm going to go to CD, desktop, my desktop. So here I am. And at the top of my screen here, with Git Shell, I'm going to create my own little folder. So let's say make directory, right? You guys should know how to do this stuff by now anyway. Make directory, and I'm going to call this directory maybe a game demo. Let's call it game demo. I've created my directory. Okay, I'm going to jump into my game demo directory. And now that I'm in here, I'll clear the screen again. Just keep it up to the top here for you guys to see. I want to create a GitHub repository, right? My GitHub repository, how do I do that on the command line? Git init, right? Here I am. I get this little extra information about my repository right now. All right, when I have a repository I want to create locally here, and this is on the Windows machine, right? And you can do this the same as the Mac, right? A couple things I need. I do need a gitignore file, right? And one thing that I want to do if I'm going to run a node or something like that is I definitely want to ignore certain files. I don't want to put up a couple of things. So there's a couple ways I can create this gitignore file. I can use a text editor, or I can do it here locally. Remember how to do this. It's like this, echo, and I want to type in what I'm going to echo into my gitignore file, right? So I'm going to say something like, if I don't want to pass in my ds underscore store files that come with my Mac, any Mac, right? And I want to pipe it into a gitignore file. I would put .gitignore, and it would create the file for me, yeah? Let's take a look at that now. So here's my, my game demo folder. Here it is. If I double click on it, it has this gitignore file that I just created on command line, right? If I open it up in Sublime Text, you can see that it has a DS store that I'm ignoring. This is the files that I will not put up on GitHub. If I'm working with Node, and if I was going to do let's do a quick crash course on how to develop with Node, right? I also want to ignore any Node modules. So I want to put Node modules. Follow me here, guys. You might learn something today. It's new. All right, so I've got this gitignore file. I'm definitely going to ignore this. And you know what? I'm going to introduce a new little IDE to you guys that's online today, right? So we're also going to ignore something called C9. Let's ignore that as well, right? So I need those three things inside your gitignore file. Yeah? Are you with me? If you are, good. I've got my gitignore file, and it's in here right now. Right, well, I added my gitignore file, and I do want to add this into my staging area because I want to update this on GitHub, right? So I'm going to do git add dot, which means everything inside my folder I'm going to add. It tells me that now I have one addition that I've kind of added into my staging area in Git. And if I look at my staging area, I can do it with git status, right? It tells me I have one initial commit that I haven't made. I've added it in there, but I don't have a commit that I have to make, right? So let's do a commit, git commit -m, and I'll mention what it is. It'll be my initial commit. Here's my initial commit. Now I can do a git log, right? And it actually has my commit number. This is my big, long commit number, which is a unique commit. It'll be unique everywhere. Nothing will be able to join this thing, right? I'm ready to push it to remote, but I have to get the remote. I have to create it. How do I do that? Well, I go online to GitHub. Here's online GitHub, and I go into my folder. I'm going to create a new repository here. which I'm going to call game demo, just like we did right here. And I'm going to actually create my repository here. And if you notice, I get this little link, and I also get some really cool instructions right here, right? When this is the instructions that I need to do this: git remote add origin, this little line here. I'm going to copy this line. Oops. I'm going to copy this line. I'm going to go back into my Git Shell, right? I'm going to paste it in there. Sorry. And when I do that, I'm going to press enter. This connects my local repository to the remote repository on Git. Yeah? Okay, cool. This is my remote repository. And now I'm going to push it to the remote. So git push -u origin master. And when I do that, because I'm using Git Shell, it doesn't have to ask me for my credentials. It knows who I am, and it sends everything up to Git. Now when I go up on Git, I refresh, and I should have my git ignore file, right? Because that's what I pushed up there. So this is up on GitHub. Yeah? Okay, I need a couple things. Let's say I create something on GitHub, or my friend, my collaborator, creates something here too. Let's say he has a README file, right? The README file is going to be called git demo, and this is a demo project to illustrate Git Shell and other command line tools. Okay, I'm going to accept this one. Here's my new commit. I've got my Git, and it also creates this little README file. This is cool. Now back to this command line. I'm going to just clear the screen with the clear command. I want to pull this information back down because I'm a commit behind. I know that, right? So I'm going to do something like this: git pull origin, right? And then when I do that, it takes whatever I have from my remote and pulls down into my local repository. Again, all these commands you can always look up on GitHub. Again, this is a crash course on how to do it, right? Git, it's all command line stuff, and it's actually fast, right? You can also combine this with your stuff in Visual Studio. You don't have to use Visual Studio to connect automatically. We have tools in Visual Studio to do that, right? But you don't have to. You can make your own Git repository locally with your machine and then do everything on command line. Okay, but I want to install Node because I want to run my game on Node, right? How do I do such a crazy thing? Anyway, well, this is what I'm going to do. First of all, you have to download and install Node, right? And if it's not available on your system, and most likely it's not right now because we haven't done this before, you go to a site called Node.js. So follow me here, right? Here's your Node.js site. Here's where you would download and install your Node.js stuff. And I recommend you do this right now, right? So when you download and install Node, when you get back to your command line, you should be able to do something like this: node ---- version. And if you can do that, example, I have version 12, version 0.12. This basically shows me what my version of Node. I know that it's in here. I've got it installed. Are you guys there with me? Right. So go ahead, download and install Node. Now you need Node in order for you to deploy to Heroku. So I want to make you guys successful. I want all of you to get the bonus marks, right? So that's why I'm showing you how to do this thing in a nutshell. Right? After you go and install things on our Node to your system, there's several other installs you have to make. Node.js is not something that you can do in 2 seconds. It's just not possible. There's lots of learnings here, right? But the great thing is, and I'm just going to say this, as it is, when you install Node, you have a little server that you can run in the background, right? That basically is like a MAMP or WAMP server, but it's going to be run through JavaScript, right? And I can't, unfortunately, we're out of scope here to tell you all the details around Node. But the great thing is, once you've got Node installed, you have to use the Node package manager, which is labeled npm. Let me just show you what that is. So if I go to npm, right, Node package manager, the Node package manager includes a bunch of other modules because Node is a modular kind of server system. And one thing I like to run when I run Node is things like Express. If I'm going to run a website, as an example, that's using an MVC framework, I use Express. We won't need that here because we're kind of running. I won't need to use Express for that, right? But I can use Express to build a server. So Express is almost like, if Node is the platform, Express is my router. It allows me to route requests to my server for my website. So of course, all the documentation for Express is on Express. Right? So if I go to Express.js, and here's Express, this is what you really need. It's what it says is an unopinionated minimalist web framework, which is what we need to set up for Node. And how do you do it? You can do this: npm install express -- save. We're not going to get there yet. First, are you with me with Node? Have you downloaded and installed Node yet? If you're with me, now we're going to do this. Follow me here, step by step. npm, right, init, enter. What this does is it creates a JSON file, right, a local JSON file called package.json that also kind of lists off all your dependencies, right, for your game. So let's say, as an example, I want to take a look at this. Right now, my name of my project is automatically called game demo because that's the folder that I'm in. You can rename this if you like. I'm going to press enter. You can also talk about the version that you're at. I'm at 0.0.1 because I just made this thing. My description is the same kind of description I would normally have, which is something like demo project to illustrate Git and etc. Right? And my entry point is index.js. It's an actually JavaScript file, right? I'll leave that as is. My test command, I'm going to leave it alone. My Git repository picks up from my Git. It automatically knows my Git repository, so it's low. And then it goes to keywords I don't need. My author is me, so I'll put that author in. And then my licensing, I'm going to leave it as ISC. I don't need a license for this. And then it gives me this JSON file. It says, hey, are you okay with this? And the answer, of course, is yes. I want this file. Okay, good. Now, if you notice my master, I'm just going to clear the screen. My master says up here, because I'm in Git Shell, it tells me that I have an addition that I haven't committed. I haven't added it to the staging area, right?
How do you clear the screen?
Clear. Right? And in Windows command prompt, CLS, right? Let's go back. So if I'm here now, and I want to take a look at what my project looks like. Okay, cool. I'll do this really quickly, right? So I know that I have a folder, right, which I called game demo, right? Here it is. Let's take a look at this right now, what I got. I've got my README file. I've got my package.json file, which I'm going to open up with Sublime or whatever text editor you want to use. And this is what it looks like. I have my game demo. I have a version. I have some scripts, right? I don't have a testing script right now. I have a repository, which actually it's mapped automatically for me, right? Here's my author. Here's my license. I don't have any. And it also gives me some URLs for people who are looking for me for any issues with GitHub. And a home page, which is just my GitHub page for now. Very nice. Well, here in my package.json file, it also keeps track of all my dependencies for my project. So there's a really cool dependency manager that you can use called Bower, right? Which is something that you can totally look into later on. I can't go into it right now. But one thing you can do with Node and npm is do something like this. npm install, right, -e, or express. Let's do express. Right? Follow me what I'm doing here. -e for EJS, right? And then what you want to put in at the end is -- save, right? And what that does is it actually, when you use the -- save switch, it actually saves this dependency in your package manager. So in your package.json file, it adds that in. Let's show you how that works. So I type that in. It's accessing right now the system, right? It's using npm, my Node package manager, built into my Node.js module. It's going to go out to the web, grab my module, and it's going to insert it into my project. Right? I'm looking for Express. Right? Now there is an Express generator. If you're going to make a Express file from scratch, there is something called an Express generator that you can actually download on the command line in a global format and use. But this is kind of out of scope for this course again, and you're not making websites, you're making a game, right? But the Express generator is definitely something I would definitely use. Okay, so this is still loading. I'm not sure if yours is as slow as this one, but you'll see a scaffold that comes down. It'll show you that there's one file, Express, that'll be installed locally into your project. Now, because we use this git ignore file that says, I don't care about any node modules, Express will not be included when I update. Here's my update. Now, you should get something like this too, yeah? Express will not be included, that module. So if I actually do a list now, here's my list, an ls command, I notice that I have node modules, right? And I included that in my gitignore file. So if I actually go into node modules, let me just clear the screen for a second so you can see. If I go into my node modules, right, and I do an ls command, I see that I have Express. It is a node module that I've downloaded. Well, guess what? Express isn't just a node module, right? It actually has, node modules of its own, right? So I've just downloaded like 10,000 files, right? You don't want to include 10,000 files in your GitHub. You want GitHub to know that if someone downloads your project, they need to do a git install command or a npm install command, and then npm will, the node package manager will look at your package.json file, see that there's a dependency, and download it and install it for you. And that's why we use package.json. Okay, cool. So we've got Node, we've got Express. I need these two things. And we also have an index.js file that we don't have in place here. So I don't have an index.js file here. I need to create one because this index.js file is where all my routing is going to happen, right? So I'm just going to kind of do this instead of command line, I'm going to do it here in Windows, Windows Explorer. Okay, so I'm going to call it a text document for now, right? And I can see all folders and files. So I'm just going to name this thing index.js, right? And when I do that, of course, it's another file. I'm watching the file here, right, in my master. So if I go ls, or if I do clear, right, back up a little bit, right, one more time. Then I have, these are my packages, and I have index.js with a length of 0 bytes, right? Now if I can open this thing up in something like a code editor like Sublime, right? And if I go to the Express website, like I was showing you, it has some getting started information, right? So let's try this getting started stuff. And if you notice, it tells you how to install and all this kind of stuff. Here's a basic Hello World application you can download and slap into your Express. Let's try this. So here's Express, and I'm going to explain this stuff really, really quickly. I'm just going to grab all this stuff, and again, I got it from my Getting Started link in the expressjs.com website, and I went to the Hello World little example, right? Okay, cool. So grab all this stuff here as an example, I copy it, and I'm going to go back into my text editor and paste it, right? And what does this all mean? Well, here I'm actually requiring, I'm just put the one thing that Express doesn't do for whatever reason, it doesn't add any semicolons, so might as well just add them, right? Just going to add them in here. Okay. So what is this going to do? Well, the great thing is, right, that this is going to create a little micro server. And if you don't see this, app.get. App.get is the first route that we're going to make. We're listening for someone accessing the website. And when we access the website, I'm going to send a hello world message. Okay, it's going to listen on port 3000, and it's going to run this callback function, which is going to provide the host and port address and all that kind of stuff. So this is my entry point into my Express application when I have this thing. To test it, I can go into command line, right? I'll clear the screen again. I can go into command line and do something like this. Node, right, index.js. And when I do that, it says, hey, I'm listening at port 3000. And this is where we're going to stop for today, for this kind of stuff. I'm listening at port 3000, so if I go to localhost, right, port 3000, right, then I get hello world. Right, so it actually populates. I've got a little node server running in the background now in my terminal. To stop the node server from running and to do, if I make any changes to my routing or anything like that, I have to Control-C. It stops my server. Now I've got a bunch of changes I just made. Let's just list this off. These are all my stuff. I've got, if you notice, it's all red here because there's some stuff that I haven't done. So in order for me to update my GitHub, so you guys can have the same files I have, I got to go like this: git add dot. These are all the files I'm adding in, right? Yeah. Let's see what's in my, that's a lot of files. Hey, how come my gitignore file didn't catch that? I said node modules, right, in my gitignore file, right? Let's check out my gitignore file and see what the hell it is, because that shouldn't be. I shouldn't have all those things in there. If my gitignore file isn't correct, then that's a bad thing, because then I'm going to add all this stuff that I don't want. Yeah, node modules. Should have caught it. Anyways, let's follow instructions either way. Okay, so I've got all these files, and I'm going to go a git commit -m, and I'm going to put in there something like created express node server. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go git push origin master, and of course it's going to add all that crap up online. Again, it shouldn't add all these node modules. That should not happen, right? But it said it pushed like 295 files up. It shouldn't have happened that way, but it did. And if I go back up to Git and refresh, then I should have everything. Oh, good, it didn't include the node. Oh, no, it did. That's bad. Anyway, so this is my new package, and you can certainly clone it and download it onto your desktop, and it'll run just for you like it did for me. All right, so that way you're not missing something that I'm doing. Okay, this is cool, but I want to deploy my site. How do I deploy my site on another server? And I recommend you sign up for something called Heroku. Right? So if I go to Heroku.com, again, this is something of a tool set that you're going to get. I'm logged in here, but you can certainly sign up for it for free. What it does is it gives you some free space for basic apps, and each app uses something called dynos. So, for example, my Starbase 12 application uses one dyno, and it's free, right? If I use additional dynos, in other words, more, it's a virtual machine. It's running it in a virtual machine. So if I want to allocate more resources, let me just do that to show you. Watch, yeah, I got to pick. Here's 2 dynos, $34.50 a month. Here's 30 dynos, right? You can put as many, you can scale up the performance as you require it.
So it's free for a dyno.
It's free for one dyno, and you can have, I believe, more than one project running at the same time, which is cool, right? So Heroku, I'd recommend you sign up. We're going to talk about it in future kind of sessions together. We're going to talk about how to deploy to Heroku if you're interested. Okay, that's one. The other thing that I recommend is sometimes people talk about in here in the class, they talk about, Tom, my tools aren't working and I can't use Visual Studio, and you know what, I'm not happy using the school computer because it's not working. I know next year I think they're going to make it so it's mandatory you have your own device. I think that's the rule, right, which is good. But let's say even your own device isn't really configured well and you want to kind of run something that's kind of compatible, and you want it to remember every time where you're at. Well, there's a service you can go to called Cloud9, free service again, to some degree. And let's look at pricing, right, for Cloud9. So I went to c9.io, and if you look at it as an example, per month, if you want to have 10 gigs of space and a gig of RAM and a couple of workspaces, it's $9 a month. So it's doable. It's not like completely unusual. But there's also a free version you can use that I recommend. 1 gig of disk space for your workspace. Who's going to use 1 gig here for your project? I want to know. I really need to know that, right? And then here's 512 meg of RAM, right? So for performance, and 1 workspace max that's archived, right? That you can sign up for free. Well, I'm already signed up, and here's my dashboard, right? Well, guess what? I'm going to create another little workspace for myself right now. So here's my workspace that I'm working on right now. I'm going to make a new one, and guess what? You can also link your workspaces from GitHub and Bitbucket. And when you do such a thing, and you can actually sign up with Cloud9 with a GitHub account, right? You don't have to even create a new account. It'll actually sign you up with GitHub. When you do that, it'll actually connect GitHub to your Cloud9 right here. And if I do that, and I go down and I want to find our little demo, which is called game demo, right? Here it is. Here's my game demo. I just made this thing. Well, guess what I can do? I can clone to edit right here online. And I can choose what kind of server platform I want to use. It has different ones that you can actually use. I'm going to use Node, obviously, right? And it says I can do open and discoverable or private. Private costs money, so we're going to go open and discoverable, and we're going to press create. And when I do that, it's cloning my workspace right now. It's taking its sweet time, doing its thing, and that's what happens, right? But once this is done, I can start editing. And guess what I get? I get a complete workspace that's online that you can use from anywhere. And it's cross-platform. All right, look at this, what I got here. I got all my stuff, my node modules, my index.js. I've got a platform that's right here. I want to do a little, I've got a virtual machine in Ubuntu that's working right here, so I can go ls. And I can see my node modules and all that kind of stuff, right? I can actually edit things online. So I can go index.js. I can do all my conversions and everything here. And it supports TypeScript, right? So if you don't want to use Visual Studio, Cloud9 is the way to go. And in addition to that, right, because right now I'm connected, I can also look at my Git, because I'm connected through Git, right? So I can do something like this, Git status, and I can see that I'm up to date, right? I'm already up to date. I'm connected to Git right away. It's automatic. If I want to run this thing in a local server, I have a server environment that I can use that's online that you can access, that you can test out for me, right? So I can create something called a runner. So when I go right, click plus, new run configuration, right? And here's my new run configuration. I can define a runner. Right now my runner is auto. I don't want it to be auto. I can go scroll down. If you notice, there's lots of options like Apache. I can make an AMP stack, like WAMP or MAMP or whatever equivalent, or I can make my own. And if I go down here to Node.js, right? So I'm running Node, and I can actually put in here something like a command, like the same command I'm using to run my package, like node, right? And then index.js, right? Well, if everything is good and I've configured this all properly, which I may or may not have, I can certainly run this thing, right? And it gives me a little warning. It says, you know what, there's a problem because I should be using process env port and process env IP as something that I'm running here instead of just 3000, because 3000 for me might work locally, but online 3000 might be taken. So it says it's going to give me a random port. So I need to use this port information. I'm just going to copy this thing right now. I'm going to go in here into my where it says app listen. I'm going to put this in. I'm going to pipe it as an option with 3000. And save that thing. So that's my first save, my first change I made to my index.js. Okay, the other thing is I don't have to say node if I'm running my index.js here. Sometimes this is just enough because I know I'm running node. It's my default. If I run this now, right, it says here it is. My index.js is running, and I got a little, it says it's listening at HTTP 000. That's incorrect. But the great thing is it'll run. Here it is. Look. game-demo.sleopolis.c9.io. So it actually gives me my own little temporary website for my workspace so that I can test live. So if I click on this thing, it brings it up and it shows me hello world. So I got everything in one space with C9. I've got and I also got Heroku Toolbelt, which you'll need to download and install if you want to deploy to Heroku, right? So I've got my Ubuntu server. I also have an immediate window where I can test JavaScript commands like alert, hello, right? I can check this stuff out. I can also do things like var, my name, is equal to Tom. Check that out, and then I can do something like a console.log. I can just try it out, see if it works. My name, and then of course it'll try and run that command, right? And it'll run it here in the immediate window, but I'm also running a runner. So I got to be careful. I'm doing kind of both things at once. But it has this little JavaScript area, and here it is. And I'm also doing this index.js that I'm running in the background. I got everything in one place here. And the thing is, now that I've updated my index.js, I can certainly push it up to GitHub. So I'm going to do a clear command. Right, I'm going to go git add dot, right, git commit, and I can -m, and I can say updated index.js, right? And once I've done that, if you notice, I added my C9 meta tags. I don't know why my git ignore is not working. Probably maybe because I didn't spell it right, probably. Should work. Anyways, but that's okay. For now, it's my error, and I'm going to go clear. And then from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it to Git. So Git push, right? Origin master. And when I do that, of course, it says, do you want to accept this footprint? Yes, I do. It's going to push it up to GitHub. And when I go back to GitHub and refresh, I have my C9 stuff as well. So I know that it's been sent up there, as well as my index.js has been updated. Right? So I've got all that updated, and if I want to work locally again, I can always pull it back down. So I can always go git pull origin, and I've got my updated information. So again, I can work with my terminal as well as online to kind of create that kind of workspace solution. Questions around this? I know it's a lot, but I'm trying to show you these other tools in the background that we can use to deploy our stuff, our game. Right, and that's really all I want to talk about. Certainly you can sign up for Cloud9 for free. It's a great little development environment that you can do. Heroku is also free, right, that you can use for now. GitHub, Bitbucket, all those services you can kind of hook into, and we'll talk about how to set up a node server so you can run your game on the node server instead of your school server or somewhere else. Okay. And Heroku, the great thing about Heroku is you can point a custom domain to that thing, so it's like a real site. Right, so this is a great option for deploying real websites. Okay, and that's it for me for this one.